Well, the president tweeted this morning. He said would love to send the New York City terrorists to Guantanamo Bay, but statistically that process takes much longer than going through the federal system. There is also something appropriate about keeping him in the home of the horrible crime he committed. Should move fast. Death penalty. And I love the fact that the underwear bomber is complaining about solitary confinement and how brutal it is. He should have thought that ahead of time, but I would love to hear him question first. So let's question Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House and GOP presidential candidate, Fox News contributor. Are you convinced, Newt, that we handled this the right way?
Well, look, I don't want to second-guess the police in the current system. But what we need to do is invent a new system. This person is an enemy combatant. They're not a normal criminal.
He called himself that.
Congress probably needs to... Right. So Congress probably should pass a law that says people who are identified as enemy combatants don't get Miranda rights. If necessary, we have to fight it through the Supreme Court. But the fact is, you're dealing with terrorists. The first thing you want to know when you capture a terrorist is what do they know. It's more important what they know. And, of course, the current entire bias right now is protecting the rights of the innocent, which is exactly right in criminal law. But when you got a guy who's driving a truck and killing 8 people, you don't have an obligation to say, oh, we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. This is an enemy combatant. This is a person who has sided with the other team. If he were an American citizen, he'd be a traitor. And we need to really revise our laws to recognize that we're in a worldwide campaign. I mean, everybody focused on Raqqa and Syria, but the truth is there's an ISIS-type campaign underway in the Philippines. We just had Americans killed in Niger from an ISIS-type campaign. We have people in the United States like this guy who are being radicalized. And it's not just about immigration. It's about radical mosques. It's about things that are networked on the Internet. We need a much more aggressive and tough-minded approach to defeating people who are our enemies.
What if
they're not confused. They're not mental health. They're our enemies. What if they do revise this law? I'm sorry?
What if they do revise the law and he doesn't have to, or going forward, anyone who does this again doesn't have to be read the Miranda rights? How can we assure ourselves that they're actually going to talk?
Well, you can't assure yourself they're going to talk. We have a heck of a lot better chance getting them to talk if they're not surrounded by lawyers telling them they don't have to say anything. Right. We had a pretty good track record for a while of interrogating people and doing it without torture. I mean, let's be very clear. There are lots of things you can do to get people to talk that are short of torture. And I think you want a sophisticated capability. You don't have to go to Guantanamo if you change the laws inside the U.S. What you can't do is get involved in a trial where the defendant has the right to make you reveal your sources. And suddenly you're having to put your entire system at risk in order to try somebody. And that's why we've always been very resistant to bringing some people back here for trial, because we knew their trials would reveal our secrets. The nature of the system.
So Newt Gingrich says change the system, and it starts with Congress. All right. The reason that guy was in this country is this diversity visa program, Newt. And a lot of people had never heard about it before, but he was able to win the lottery. He came to this country and then brought 23 relatives with him. The president says Congress should just, pull the plug on that thing. What do you think?
You know, if you just applied common sense, you'd realize how often Donald J. Trump is right and how often his critics are just stupid. Listen to what you just said. This guy wins a lottery and then brings 23 relatives. The average American has no notion that's going on. What we did over the last 10 or 15 years is we bent over backwards. The Germans are even worse than we are. The Scandinavians are worse than we are. All these groups bent over backwards basically to commit cultural suicide. And said, oh, please let us make sure, for example, that people can come to us from countries that are very radical. But let me remind you, this is about more than just immigrants being radicalized. There are Americans being radicalized. The Santa Barbara killer terrorist was, in fact, an American, although his wife was from overseas. The Orlando killer was terrorist was an American, although his father had come and was first generation and was in many ways very anti-American. We're going to have to be much tougher about the mosques. We're going to have to be much tougher about what's happening in terms of the Internet. And I think we're going to have to allow the police to be more aggressive. New York prior to the current mayor, had a very, very aggressive intelligence system, probably the best city system in the world. And, of course, the current mayor is just totally out to lunch, has no idea what terrorism is, and is mystified by all of this.
Yeah, we have to whisper during the show in case he's watching this. He's still sleeping. He gets up at around 11, works out, and then rests in his office. He's just a train wreck. Meanwhile, let's talk about House Republicans. Today, they're finally going to unveil their tax reform plan. They're having a lot of trouble getting on the same page. Newt, they're not going to lower the top rate. Does that bother you?
No. Look, I am for the largest possible tax cut that they can pass. One of the lessons that I hope they've learned from the Obamacare experience is you have to have 218 in the House, 50 senators and the vice president, and the signature of the president. You show me a really nice tax cut that meets those requirements, I'm for it. I'd like it to be as big as possible, but I want it to pass. I'd like it to have as much reform as possible, but I want it to pass. They can get to a 20% corporate rate, which will lead to an explosion of jobs. If they can dramatically reduce small business taxes down to 25, which is a huge cut from where it is right now, I'm for it. If they can double the middle-class deduction, I'm for it. Now, they're going to have to maneuver some. Look, that's the legislative process. I mean, the whole point of the legislative process is how do you get the votes? And it's the right of every member to say, my district either is better off or it's not better off. And if you can't make my district better off, I'm not voting for it. So there'll be some maneuvering. But I think on balance that they've done a tremendous job. I give Paul Ryan a lot of credit. I give Kevin Brady, the Ways and Means Chairman, a lot of credit. They've been flexible. They've given up things they intellectually would love to have, but they know they can't get them. And I think they're right on the edge of a truly great achievement that will lead to an economic boom of enormous proportions.
We'll see if we get the announcement today. It's supposed to be. Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, thanks so much.